Welcome to Horsepower Hair TV. Leigh from the Ruts D.C, as guitarist, should I say, lead guitarist for the Ruts D.C, has come and to give us an interview today, which we're very grateful for because he's a busy man.
Well, trying to be.
So hopefully, Leigh, we're going to shed some light on the music industry with you.
Okay.
A couple of things that are questions I want to ask.
Yep.
Doing these interviews, you know, I notice, you know, I get a dry mouth before I start doing the interview. I feel a bit nervous. Is that something you know, is a known thing within the music industry?
Yes, is the short answer with that. I think it is anyway. I think everyone's a bit different with this. Some people seem to breeze through things. Other people I've seen are literally shaky and very, very nervous before shows. Most people are somewhere between the two. I think what's interesting is it's been pointed out to me that you become a bit more withdrawn, perhaps, in my case. I've got stuff that I do in a particular, and you don't realise you're doing stuff in a particular order. You have a routine maybe that you don't necessarily know you've got, because we're all kind of creatures of habit, aren't we?
Indeed, indeed.
So maybe before a show you do things in a certain order, or you want to get changed in a particular way and things. I don't do anything consciously, but yes, I think it does come into it. Yeah.
As a man, I'm not going to say an older man, a man with experience.
Oh.
Do you find it gets easier with time?
Yes, I think that's probably the case. I think maybe it's one of those things that it doesn't change, but you get used to it.
Cool.
Which could be said about quite a few things, I think. As I say, I'm personally never aware of being really jittery or shaky before shows. Although I've met people that are get very nervous. So I'm not consciously a sufferer, I suppose you'd call it. But then again, you should be excited before a show. You should be
Indeed,
looking forward
passionate.
to it, and that will affect your mood and affect how you do things. So I think this is sort of inevitable.
Would you say, you know, there's people out there that are famous? Are they exempt from this, or is it just as bad for them?
No, there's always stories. I think it was Frank Sinatra who was you know, physically sick before shows sometimes. I think
wow.
Tony Bennett, those sorts of things. I think he was. You know, I think they're all kind of. You know, that definitely fits into it. So no, I don't think they're immune. I mean, it's a strange thing because I'm lucky enough to do some quite big shows and some quite, you know, then you go back to playing in a pub or something with a different band, and in many ways it would be wrong to say there's no difference, but the small gig can be just as important to the people there as the big gig is to the people who go to that, and it's a bit strange sometimes. You know, we're lucky enough to play in front of thousands of people sometimes, and then you know you come off tour and you end up playing in another band in a pub at the bottom of the road. But you have to recognise that, as I say, is an important evening to the people that are there. You don't know what's going on in their lives. They might be escaping from something or whatever you want to call it. So, and actually, the reason I've mentioned this is, again, speaking personally, the smaller ones in some ways are more difficult because you can see someone at the bar going...
being dragged out by...
Or worse still, yeah, and worse still, they nudge their mate and go... or something like that, you know, they see them point at you and then go, you know, and you see this all the time. Yeah. You know, so people don't realise what they look like while they're watching sometimes.
So, are you looking at obviously you're concentrating on what you're doing, but are you looking at the crowd as you're playing, reading the crowd? That's
an interesting question, actually. I remember seeing Dr. Feelgood, Lee Brillo was one of the great front men. And I was quite close to the front, I think it was at Hammersmith Palais, and they came out and off they went. I remember seeing Lee went up to the microphone and looked out and sort of did this. Should do it at the camera, shouldn't I? Did this. But I realised he wasn't looking, in the way I'm not looking at the camera now, he wasn't looking at my face, he was looking just above the line, as it were, above the crowd. So he was doing this, and it looked like he was looking at everybody. And I saw him interviewed ages later, and he said when he goes out at a venue, he would look for something in the sound check, so he'd look for something at the back of the hall, like a clock, or something, the sound desk, or something that he could look at. And he'd go straight out and look at that first thing, he'd get the microphone and look out across at that. And of course it looked as though he was looking at you, or me, or whoever was in the audience at that time. And actually he was looking just above it, which, and I must admit I've used that a few times.
Yeah.
You go, especially if you do feel a bit nervous, or you think there might be a bit of an atmosphere in the room and things like that, just to look slightly above and kind of look, you know, that kind of backwards and forwards thing, you kind of almost feel the room out a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
You see people, and I should also say, of course, if you've got lights in your eyes, you don't see the room lit up. You just see a lot of if there's a light at the back, you can see, say, something that's at the back of the hall, like a bar or merch or something. You see people right at the front, depending on how the lights are on. And again, if you're in the support band, most of them are not there to see you. They're holding a spot at the front to watch their favourite group, and they might be right in front of you, and which is kind of cool, but they're probably not there to see you, and you have to sort of, what's the word? That's all in the equation. We were lucky enough to do a tour supporting the Stranglers earlier this year, and we've done quite a few shows with them. We did about 3 or 4 weeks around the country with them, and I'm on the stage right, so as you look at the stage, you see me on the left. And that's the side that Jean-Jacques Bonnel, the Stranglers, is on. And as you may know, he's quite popular with the ladies. He always has been a very good-looking chap.
Like yourself, of course.
Well, I don't know about that, but what it means is every night there was all these girls in front of me. They were all waiting for JJ, and there's no point in me saying that they were waiting for me. They were waiting for JJ, but it was quite interesting.
A good gig to play.
Diversion.
Yeah.
Segs on the other side, like, got a load of blokes. You would,
that's the way it
come
goes.
over on the side of the stage. It's great over here. So, but I mean, but seriously, that you sometimes see people, you sometimes don't, and it's always a little bit. Sometimes people say they meet them somewhere and they say, "I was right down the front. Did you see me?" And sometimes you don't, not because you weren't looking or you didn't want to see them, but like I say, there might be a light that you can't see that's coming right in my eyes, and that. And so you don't. Which can make dodging missiles quite difficult to throw things, but doesn't happen quite so much.
Well, those punk concerts.
It doesn't happen quite so much these days. As you say, being a more experienced rather than not quite so much.
But I think it's fair to say that I am quite keen on a tattoo.
You've hidden that well.
I know, thank you, yes. But I've heard a story, I'm not sure if this is true, I'm not sure if you told me or someone else told me.
Go on.
Someone's had a tattoo of you, done a portrait of you tattooed on them and showed you, was it a Rebellion? Yeah,
this is, it's one of those, is it true or is it false? It's true.
And
I saw him last weekend actually. We played a festival up in Newcastle, the North East Calling Festival, which is like a kind of an indoor festival. They do a lot of these calling festivals now, which is like they have a 2,000 capacity venue and they have 8-9 bands during the day. Great gig, 30 quid to get in or whatever it is. You have
great.
The headline was the Skids, fantastic. We were on just before then, and I went out to see. We had Kerry, a young lady, doing our merch. And I went out to see. She just checked she was all right. If she needed anything, and there he was, the legend that is Tony Lee. He's a great character, local lad up there. And he sort of came up, shook hands, and he just went, and there was my face on his shin. And the first time he did it was at the Rebellion Festival, and I should point out he also has Dave and Seg's faces on his leg as well. It's not just
you.
It's not quite the
It's
Alan
the whole
Partridge.
band.
Yeah, it's not
It's
the
the
Alan
whole band.
Partridge.
Yeah.
But I am kind of on the front of his shin, and I remember when he first showed us it, thinking, and Seg's, the bass player, was brilliant. He just said, "You don't get used to it, Lee." The first time
but there's more tattoos of the Ruts on other people.
There's quite a lot of Ruts. The original Ruts logo, the triangle with Ruts.
I've seen that on people.
There's quite a few of those around, and as he said, the first time I saw it, he said, "I was just amazed." He said, "You don't get used to it. That people have taken that."
So we had it was a good friend actually, and a customer, and I put it out there years ago. And you were probably you definitely around then because you've been around since the beginning of horsepower hairdressing. But
absolutely.
I said, whoever gets the horse tattooed on him gets free haircuts for life. And my mate Rob actually has it on his calf.
Oh wow!
Display, and that's pretty cool to think that someone's actually
I
done
mean,
it. Of course, I have a couple of those on me, but that's no surprise, is it?
But as I say, seeing an image of my face looking up at me from someone's leg, that does stay with you. Yes.
Haunt you maybe sometimes.
Yeah, a little bit. Hi Tony, if you're watching.
Yeah, Tony, maybe we need to interview you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know why I'm sitting here, should be talking to him. It start rolling all his sleeves up, and I'm probably all over them. I don't know. I don't think too deeply about
that. So obviously, I've seen you playing bands in pubs and stuff like that back from my drinking days, and you was always good. But when and it's still one of the best gigs I ever went to. And funny enough, you was at the other gig I went to that was one of the best gigs, in that realm, was when I went to see the Pistols, and that's with you and a couple of your friends. You very kindly took me along.
That's right, I remember, yeah.
Brilliant. Great night. It was a good night, wasn't it?
It was classic.
But yeah, when I saw you playing up there, it was like like you'd ramped it up. I don't know. It was just a whole new level of seeing my friend play guitar.
Oh wow.
Which I recommend anyone to go and see the Ruts D.C. It's a great night out. But behind that, to get to that point, and something we discussed before, there's a lot of practice, isn't there? For those people out there who think, I'm going to be a guitar player, I'm going to stand out in front of 10 or tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, sure.
I'm assuming there's a lot of lonely nights spent practicing.
Yeah, there still is, really. I mean, there's a thing, isn't there? 10,000 hour. Is it 10,000 hours they reckon you have to spend to become proficient or expert, or whatever the word is, at anything?
I've never heard that.
Yeah, I think it's
I might work out how many hours I've spent cutting hair.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of learning the guitar or playing the guitar, I started playing when I was I got a guitar when I was about 13 or 14. My family up in Merseyside had two cousins that we used to go and visit in school holidays, and one of them suddenly had a guitar. They'd suddenly become kind of sort of bikery chaps. In a year that we hadn't seen them, they'd suddenly got long hair and motorbikes, and and girlfriends. I mean, how did that happen? But one of them had a guitar. Gary had this guitar and he was playing it. I remember being really fascinated by it, and badgering my mum and dad for a guitar. And I got one for Christmas, possibly not that year, might have been the year after. I thought, wow, fantastic guitar. I remember picking it up and then I sort of realised that you didn't just play it. There was this terrible moment.
Got to learn.
By Boxing Day, it was like tragedy had befallen me. And I thought, oh no, you don't just go, And it went in the corner and was a bit. But I sort of persevered with it after I started seeing bands and people were doing things. And yes, it one of the things that everybody that plays an instrument has got in common, if you like, is, as you say, that kind of solitary practice. Sometimes with other people, but you do spend a lot of time sort of working on nothing.
Right.
Whether people learn scales or chords, or whether they just have got a good ear and they can pick things up from recordings. And of course, some people have got more ability than others. It's an obvious thing that everybody's got something they can do. Again, speaking personally, I didn't ever find that I was a natural player. I had to work. I still play and practice, not in a particularly formal way, but I try to play as often as I can, even if it's fairly doodling and just doing stuff, but also learning songs. That's what I've been doing today, funnily enough, for the show I'm doing next week. But so yeah, there is a hidden side to it, as well as all that. So
this is probably one of those stupid questions that people ask you, but how do you remember all the songs? Because I know you play many bands, you've got a huge repertoire, if I say that right. How do you remember all that?
Yeah.
I know it's the same as, say, me cutting hair. I can remember how to go through all different haircuts, but this is where the stupid question, I think, comes in. Can you just kind of pick up a guitar and make do if you don't quite know?
Ooh.
Dangerous, I know. Can you blag it? That's what I'm asking.
I was going to use that word almost there. Can you bluff it, actually, isn't it? Well, again, in the way that some people have an ability to play ahead of others, some people are just lucky that they can remember songs. In the same way as some people can remember a poem or a piece of writing, and most of us will be sitting there for ages trying to remember the third line, never mind the whole page of it. So some people will have an aptitude to that. I'm somewhere in between. I'm not afraid to play along with a recording for as long as I think it takes for me to learn it. As an aside, I was running through I'm playing with the band Menace next weekend. They're doing the 100 Club, sort of a kind of where they're getting all their old lineups together. They've asked me to play in one of them. I've got a 4-song set and then some other ones at the end. I went to the 4 songs today and thought I'll just have a quick run through them, and I did not exactly hit the wall, but I was looking at them thinking I could play these on Tuesday. This has kind of gone a bit. So you find this thing where you think you know it, maybe you haven't done quite enough on it, and you need to do a bit more. If that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do, as much as is necessary. As I say, other people can play it once and they've got it. There's also, of course, songs are generally, let's call it pop music, pop songs or rock songs are structured. There'll be a verse and a chorus, and the chances are the second verse will be the same as the first. Not always, but so you can learn the structure sometimes of a song easier than you can learn the chords or the riff or whatever. So you have to find your way in. Most of us just have to play it a lot.
Right, okay.
And of course, some people. That's fine. If you can read music, you can write it out, obviously. And I don't read music I can read it a little bit. I can read a chord chart, so I can write a chord chart out and read that, and hopefully then you don't need that after a while. I don't like having bits of paper on stage if I can help it. Although these days people have iPads on mic stands, don't they? You can see them reading chords, and they've got there's attachments that you can put on a microphone stand for your iPad or whatever it might be. So some people will never learn songs. They're just not lucky enough to have the memory that does it, and they will have bits of paper all over the place, or they'll just have to have ways of remembering things, and they can be really good players.
Cool. My next question is, and this is where this question stems from. I believe the optimum amount of motorcycles a man can own is whatever you have plus one.
Okay.
So you can never really have enough.
Sounds perfectly reasonable.
Guitars. How many do you have, Lee?
Oddly enough, there is a saying in the guitar world, how many guitars is enough? And the answer is, of course, just one more.
Much the same as the motorcycle.
And there is a syndrome, which they call gear acquisition syndrome, I think it is. I think I said that what it is. I don't really subscribe to that, of course.
Of course not.
I'll never be quite as silly as that. How many guitars do I have? Not as many as people think. Probably I could do with a few less. I could always do with a few more. It's in single figures. I think I've got 9 guitars.
Really? Which
is quite a lot for me. That's the most I've ever had. A couple are kind of indulgent ones in the sense that I've got the Les Paul that I played back in the Price, which is the early 80s. I've had that all the way since then, and that's my old mate. I don't take that out kicking now. Although the Price are playing at the end of the year, so I might use it for that. So that's a home guitar. I don't take that.
Right. Okay. So do you have like a go-to everyday guitar that goes everywhere, or do you have one that you play in pubs with, one that you play with the Ruts D.C?
All of the above. So
right.
In the Ruts, I have 2 Les Pauls that I use with the Ruts, which I can interchange. I tend to use a Les Paul Custom these days, which is the black guitar you see me using. The red one that I used to use all the time is a standard, so they're just slightly different models of Les Paul. That works best for our sound, for our music, and I like the feel of it when we're playing, and it is appropriate for what we do, so I use those with the Ruts. Maybe something different one day, but they're the ones that work at the moment. Without getting too nerdy about this, they're Gibson guitars. Fender guitars have a somewhat different sound. They have a different style of pickup in them, which would be more appropriate for a different style of music. Right. So I've got a couple of Telecasters which I use for what that might be better for, maybe a bit more rock and roll, or kind of pub stuff or whatever I use them.
Is there anything you won't play? Someone says, right, I've got a gig for you. It's a paid gig, money no object.
Can you do it?
Will you? Is there a certain genre of music that you wouldn't play?
Not that I wouldn't play, but that I can't play. I'm no jazz guitar player. Jazz is another world. I saw some friends play some jazz last night, and one of them said to me, "You should have brought your guitar along." And I said, "Oh no, it was best that I didn't. Wouldn't be very good here." That's a completely different style of playing, a completely different mentality almost. Love to say I could do it, but I'm realistic. It's not for me. Again, I haven't done the 10,000 hours on jazz. Whatever you want to call it. I haven't done enough listening. You need to have the sound of it in your mind. You need to, not just in your fingers. You need the sound. I'm not a very good country player. Again, I love hearing some of the country guitar players, but I haven't got the fingers for that. Could I get them? Again, where's me 10,000 hours?
Yeah, it's all the time.
I play too much Leary rock and roll, really.
So everyone says you should never meet your heroes.
They're probably correct. Let's face it.
Have you met your heroes?